I know we all don't mind the good old 9 to 5, as it was something we had to fight for due to labor laws. In case you didn't know, when it comes to jobs and doing the day-to-day, there was a huge issue with the average working person from getting off work at a reasonable hour and earning a livable wage. So when the labor laws came through due to strikes that occurred over time, with the first one occurring in ancient Egypt, people were able to be compensated for the work that they put in. However, in medieval times, and you were a peasant, this was a lot more difficult to come by due to the caste systems, and you were more casted to the side. Hi, my name is Jessa, and please join me as we look together the top 10 horrible jobs medieval peasants were forced to have. And before we begin, in the last video I was in, top 10 sinister rituals from the Victorian era you can't unlearn, I did give you guys a riddle. Did you get it? The riddle was, what has many teeth but cannot bite? The answer is, drumroll please, a comb. Your next riddle will be at the end of this video. Anyways, let's get started. Number 10. Beggars. Yes, this was 100% a profession in the medieval times that a lot of peasants had no choice into doing. And no, it wasn't a 9 to 5 gig, as it was I'm forced to do this because I have no other choice gig. Being a beggar included laborers, hangmen, and prostitutes, as well as even craftsmen. Most of these, with the exception of the craftsmen, were located outside the municipal jurisdictions and were left to be on the outskirts of town. Unfortunately, due to the caste systems laid out in the medieval times, there were also those who were suffering from leprosy who were among the group. And the mistreatments of the beggar was considered vagrancy, and if they were caught begging, they would be branded with a giant V on their forehead and enslaved for 2 years. Repeat offenders would then be executed. Number 9. Leech Collector. If you were sick one day, you might literally think you had some bad blood, so the best way to cure you was to stick leeches on you and hope they suck the bad blood out. And in order for your local family doctor to procure these tiny vacuum cleaners with teeth, they would get a leech collector to do the job. And of course, they didn't have protection, as they would wander the murky leech-infested waters, and then hundreds of thousands of parasites would be lurking within that lurk. But hey, this job was pretty high in demand, and I'm pretty sure if you're really desperate, I think they might have some on Indeed. Number 8. Scullion. If you ever worked in a kitchen or in the food industry, you know how important it is to get your work health and safety certification and what chemicals to not mix, making sure the kitchen is spotless to reduce pests, and of course making the customer happy with their order. But for scullions, they were considered the lowest of kitchen workers, whose duty included washing and cleaning the kitchen. I mean, that doesn't seem that bad, it basically sounds like our modern take of the busboy. But for scullions, they didn't have the modern cleaning supplies, and medieval guests would typically eat with their hands, so the cleanup job of food was like cleaning up after a child. And cleaning the kitchen was no walk in the park either, considering it as the conditions of a slaughterhouse with blood, gore, and filth. The concept of cross-contaminations didn't exist, so the smell and slaughter of dead animals were so prevalent, and guess who had to clean that up? Number 7. Scullery Maid. Hospitality is a lot of work, and a lot of domestic workers should be given credit where credit is due. But in this instance, that is not what this is, as the medieval scullery maid would be working in the kitchen and having to clean up after her employer, working in the kitchen having to pluck pheasants, cook, serve, clean, all under the tense and hazardous conditions. Many of them would have to do dirty and unpleasant jobs and be forced to do long hours and hard work. And considering many jobs on this list were dirty, dangerous, and thankless, anyone else doing these jobs were always looked down on. Number 6. Gong Farmer. I don't know about you, but so far these jobs seem pretty stressful, and since not many locations had proper plumbing, people would toss their waste out onto the streets to accumulate. And gong farmers were tasked with taking out the human waste from the town streets and use it as fertilizer. For many agriculture methods, the use of fertilizer is basically animal waste and soil used to cultivate plant growth, and since waste and feces laid rampant on the streets, gong farmers would collect them and use them on, well, their farms. This was an extremely disgusting and of course one of many non-sanitary jobs, and considered one of the worst. Number 5. Rat catcher. Now, we all know what pest control is, but rat catcher is a very specific title. In the medieval times, those who were bestowed the title rat catcher were told to go into abandoned homes and other areas where food was more prevalent. They would basically have to catch rats and mice, as they were carriers of the infected fleas and were major key factors in spreading diseases and illnesses. Their job became more essential after a devastating tragedy that would befall on the millions, the bubonic plague, a disease that reigned rampant between the years of the 1347s and the 1350s. The rat catchers would use long-handled trays or baskets to scoop up the rodents before they could escape, and would be armed with clubs or sticks just in case the rats wanted to attack, and they would often. They would also kill the rats by bashing or stomping onto their heads and then collect them into a sack. Number 4. Chimney Sweep. Considering there wasn't any heating during winter, many castles would resort to having a fireplace to keep the room warm, and those who had to clean up the fireplace were chimney sweeps. When we think of chimney sweeps, we sometimes think of a Disney character that's super fun and charming, which I'm pretty sure they are, but chimney chimney sweeps were left the task of having to remove the ash, soot, and other particles stuck in chimneys. Seems pretty doable till you realize how much of a health hazard this was. With the air being so heavy with smoke, this job also came with respiratory distress and diseases, illnesses and infection, skin irritation, and eye damage. And considering the regulation of child labor laws were not into effect till the 1800s, a lot of kids were at risk and endangerment as much as the adults were. Many of them would have to do dirty and unpleasant jobs and be forced to do long hours and hard work. And considering many jobs on this list were dirty, dangerous, and thankless, anyone doing these jobs were always tend to look down on. Number 3. Tanner. Leather is a very primarily useful source during the medieval times, and from being used from armory for knights, work equipment for craftsmen, or to fashion for royals, those who are to make said leather are said to be one of the worst jobs in the medieval times considering its preparation. Leather is commonly made from animal skin, so being a tanner requires one to remove all the fur from the skin, soak the skin in lime water for about a week before putting it in barrels for another few days. This process was very disgusting, smelly, and tedious as its process is used to ensure all the flesh of the animal is removed. And since they had to use lime water, it's considered a health hazard risk since it causes skin corrosion and irritation. Number 2. Urinal Cleaner. With our modern advancement of the flush and plumbing system, it is not as bad as being a urinal cleaner during the medieval times. Their job was pretty self-explanatory, clean up the urine from outhouses, latrines, and privies, but the smell from these literal hole-in-the-ground spots would be so rancid, anyone would vomit and hurl. For peasants, it also meant making ends meet, so you'd have to do the dirty work if it means getting some kind of incentive to survive. Number 1. Groom of Stool. The Groom of Stool was a position in the royal household in charge of cleaning, you guessed it, the king's royal stool, in specific, his personal butt wiper. They didn't have baby powder, but if they did, they made sure that was very clean and dry. They also had to wipe down his buttocks with a sponge or a wet nurse, and just to be a glorified butt washer. They were also responsible for helping him urinate and defecate by providing a wash basin, and for them, it would just be a regular old pot. And considering how unhygienic the medieval times were, I don't think they had latex gloves to protect themselves. However, this position was actually seen as a very positive trait as it meant to be the king's trusted butt wiper, and it is a position that the king had to trust you with, as it was more focused towards the families and close families and their sons as patrons to the king. But for some, this was also a huge pay upgrade. Specifically, this job was created by King Henry VIII as he wasn't able to fully clean himself, and he is the one who created this job opportunity. This position was then discontinued in the 19th century, much later on as, cleaning supplies became more advanced. As always, to jobs that pay the rent, or the very least pay for your meal, otherwise you might as well try to be a knight or try to marry up as much as you can. Anyways, was there a job that you would take or no? Did you have a favorite, or did you learn anything interesting today? Just let me know. Oh yeah, for your next riddle. Are you ready? I am easy to lift, but very hard to throw. What am I? Be sure to put your answer in the comments below, and I'll reveal the answer in the next video, Top 10 Evil Scientists that performed bizarre experiments. That's all for today. Thank you for joining me. My name is Jessa. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see your beautiful faces in the next one. Bye! I know we all don't mind the good old 9 to 5, as it was something we had to as a medieval scullery maid. But in this case, instance is not what this is for the medieval non-sanitary jobs and considered one of the worst. Number 5. Rat catcher.